All right, so everyone, it's 1 p.m. on the East Coast, and as always, we're going to start on time. Everyone's now on mute, but when the time comes for questions or comments, I'll tell you how to request unmuting so I can call on you. My name's Azer Cole, and I'm one of two Citizen Empowerment Coordinators here at American Promise. And welcome to the American Promise National Citizen Leader Call for August 2018, a call that happens on the second Saturday of each month. Thanks everyone who's taken the time out of your busy weekends to join us today. Or maybe you couldn't make it and you're listening to this recording afterwards. Either way, you're stepping up to save our democracy, so thank you. We're honored to have just an incredible guest speaker today, Steve Lipscomb, founder of FixItAmerica and member of the American Promise Advisory Council. And after we hear from Steve, we'll hear a grassroots victory from Vicki Barnes and her recent success of meeting with Congressional candidate Richard Painter, who signed the candidate pledge. And it'll transition into a discussion around this month's action, which is writing letters to our candidates asking for a meeting to discuss signing the candidate pledge. On Lobby Day earlier this summer, a number of the offices where members of Congress were already co-sponsors of legislation expressed interest in having that member of Congress go a step further and write an op-ed on our issue and ask for help in writing it and getting it placed. So with that in mind, we're going to hear from Ed Erickson, president of Erickson Communications Group and former political science professor at University of Massachusetts Amherst, talk later on about the value of an op-ed, how to write one, and most importantly, how to effectively coordinate with your elected official's office to craft one together. So thank you all for stepping up, and if you're interested in learning more about what it takes to start an American Promise Association, an APA, in your community, please send me an email at azorc@americanpromise.net. That's AZORC as in cat at americanpromise.net. And I just want to start by sharing this quote. It was first written by author William Johnson and powerfully expressed by Tri-County, New Jersey APA co-leader Marie Henselder Kimmel at the National Citizen Leadership Conference this June, who said, when addressing the crowd, "If it is to be, it is up to me." I'm going to repeat that. If it is to be, it is up to me. And just as this is a national effort made up of local ones, winning the 28th Amendment is a collective effort made up of individual ones. And that's what citizen leadership is all about. So thank you all of you for being here and for stepping up. And with that, it's my pleasure to turn it over to Ben Gubitz, Political Director of American Promise, to introduce our guest speaker. Hey, Ben.
Hello, Azer, and hello to all. I love that quote. If it is to be, it is up to me. What a wonderful quote to kick things off here. Always happy to join folks on this wonderful Saturday call, and today's especially special call because I get to introduce our guest speaker for today, a very good friend of mine, gentleman by the name of Steve Lipscomb, who many of you on the call probably already know. And if you've ever met Steve, you know that he's a doer, and everything that he does with a certain spark of ingenuity. Steve has this kind of magnetic positivity, and everything that he touches really turns into a success, which is why we're so happy and lucky to have Steve on board this huge fight for a 28th Amendment. Steve's the founder of the World Poker Tour, which I have to say I've spent way too many hours watching. He's the CEO of Practicrats and the founder of FixItAmerica, which is an organization solely focused on winning a 28th Amendment to address not only money's corrupting influence in our political system, but also partisan gerrymandering. And so, Steve, before I turn it on over to you, let me give you a heads up of the type of folks that are on this call. You're talking to people like Jan Nishimura in Columbus, Ohio, who helped start the newest American Promise Association there last week and has already developed a relationship with her local paper's columnist who wrote a really fantastic article in the Columbus Dispatch about that American Promise Association launch. You're also talking to folks like Kim Wass in Massachusetts, who recently teamed up with 300 volunteers to get the 28th Amendment question on the 2018 ballot. Yes on 2, if you're calling in from Massachusetts. and people like Rod and Lynn Morrison, who, Steve, I know you probably met in Wyoming, or at the NCLC in D.C., who are from Wyoming, and recently had a joint meeting with their 2 Republican senators and their Republican representative from Wyoming while at the conference in D.C. earlier this summer. So these are the types of folks that you're talking to on the phone here. And with that, Steve, I'm going to kick it on over to you, brother.
Thank you so much, Ben, and thanks to American Promise and Azar and Lavoie and really all of the people who spend their time trying to make it work. As you know, if you were at the conference, I all the time use the metaphor of a soccer net that is luckily limited in the number of goalies that'll keep out all of the soccer balls we want to kick so that some of them go in. And truly, I think the strength of American Promise and the strength of this movement is that it's decentralized, and that means that everyone on the call, and the things that you're doing every day literally are the most important piece of that equation. I come from the entertainment world, and William Goldman was one of the great screenwriters of all time, and when he wrote his book, he started and ended it with the phrase, "No one knows anything." And whenever I'm asked to sort of talk to people like this group that I revere so much, I always think it's important to say that I am more than happy to add my perspective, but I certainly don't believe that it is more important than anyone's perspective, particularly in localities where you know how to make things actually happen, because that's how it moves forward. So to Jan, who's starting in Ohio, Kim in Massachusetts, Rod and Lynn, who I do remember meeting, and what you're doing in Wyoming, and everybody else who happens to be on this call, listen to it later, or will never ever even coincide with what we're doing. It is how things move that we keep kicking important balls at that net, because sometimes when you show up like we did at Lobby Day, even when you have bagpipes and 150 people marching on Congress to deliver a message, it still feels as if a bit like that citadel is impregnable, but it's just not. And so I appreciate being asked to sort of give some thoughts, and the things that I think I'm going to sort of really focus on are the here and now, which is the fact that we are in an election cycle that is an opportunity. Every election cycle is an opportunity. And when we care about an issue, the thing I think that's sometimes difficult is to figure out how we translate that passion that we have for that issue. And in my case, it's money in elections and governance, as well as gerrymandering. How do we advance that forward? And one of the things I always believe the art of war teaches us is that you want to learn as much as you can from the people that are on the other side and who do things better than you do. And so the group that sometimes I find most challenging in this space is the NRA. On the other hand, I am a student of the NRA because they have been remarkably effective at taking and targeting elections and elected officials such that they care about their issue, my belief is, more than they should. On the other hand, it's instructive as to how we can be more targeted. So as I hear Ben talk about these important people who are joining on the call today, if there's anything that I can suggest, it's that essentially you don't ever let it go. And the best example of the NRA is after Columbine in Colorado, the legislature, there was enough political will to pass some meaningful gun violence regulations. So regardless of what you think about that issue, The legislature, the public got together and passed something, and the NRA essentially went after the two main sponsors of that bill, had a recall election, and they were out of office before the next election cycle. That to me is incredibly instructive because, first of all, it completely chilled the market, meaning that everybody in every state that ever wanted to pass any kind of legislation had the fear of the NRA. I won't say the fear of God, but perhaps a little bit of both put in them. So it became much harder in any state, any of the other 49 states, to pass legislation. No matter what state you're in today, and as Ben was talking about some of the things that are happening, and I love that you're going to be talking to Vicki Barnes from Minnesota, because every state has things that are moving forward in their legislature. So this cycle, you will be able to very easily go and find out what disclosure law was attempted in the last legislative session, what 28th Amendment effort was contemplated in the last election. The thing we haven't been able to do that well, I don't think yet in this movement, is to create the accountability that the NRA is so good at creating. And that is, if you're sitting in the legislature and you vote against a disclosure bill, something as simple as, you know what, if somebody comes in and gives $30 million in dark money to run ads against somebody in New York, or if they give $500,000 in a state like mine in New Mexico, that makes a difference, and all you want to do is find out who's giving the money. If somebody votes against that, there should be some sort of accountability. And so my humble suggestion is any way that we all together can, state by state, county by county, and election cycle by election cycle, make that piece of the equation come to bear, we will begin to have a profound impact on actually changing how legislators think. Because if they think they can vote however they want and then go out and say, oh yeah, I'm for getting money out of politics, with absolutely no accountability for how they actually act, either by commission or omission, meaning if they are not willing to sponsor, if they are not willing to put something forward, this should become a votable issue. It should become a litmus test for us, because if they're not willing to get particularly the dark money and things of that sort that we can address through at least transparency now, we ought to be standing up. So that's sort of in a nutshell in this election cycle. Anything you can do to help kick those balls into the net, kick them at the net, I think it has a profound impact and oftentimes is not that hard. My suggestion is anyone who's running for office, the person most likely to be your advocate if they voted against something that that is a very important money and politics issue, the most interested party will be whoever's running against that person. So if you simply go to and make sure to inform candidates on the other side of the equation that this person is not voting for an issue that we all know, depending on your state, anywhere from 76 to 96% of the people in that state believe in, that gives you a way to translate that into action, and then rally people around the people who voted for it, right? Help that message be encouraging. So take the carrot and add it to the stick and give yourself an opportunity to show up and say that in my state, Brian Egoff, who was a real great champion for us with FixItAmerica, help walk districts, help rally people to walk districts. Because then the next time Brian Egoff, our Speaker of the House, sees something like this coming, he thinks, those guys are my guys, and we ought to be working together. By guys, I mean guys, and male and female, and everything in between. All right, so with that, I'm going to then go on to sort of my next thought starter so that we can get to questions. And that's really to talk a little bit about Lobby Day. And I'm sure some of you are aware, some of you were there, but when we marched on Congress, 150 some odd strong, and had banners from 5 national organizations, like I said, with bagpipes, which Ben laughs at me because I just can't seem to stop mentioning how fun it was to have the song "America" played by bagpipes as we marched on Congress. I love the bagpipes. Everybody loves a bagpipe. It's, in my mind, a translation of what Azer was beginning to talk about, which is how do we bring action to the table, right? We can be as frustrated as we want, but if we can't find a tangible path to making something as crazy as a 28th Amendment become a reality, then it's probably not worth our time. If you see the number of people that are what I would consider to be very serious political entities and people who are working on this specific task, it is a testament to how we believe that there is a path, and we don't know exactly which of those paths is going to find its way to make it happen in Congress, but we are all working because we truly believe that doing things like what we did, marching on Congress, make a difference. So very quickly to outline, the state of New Mexico passed the FixItAmerica constitutional amendment, which I will not read to you, but I suggest you go to FixItAmerica.org. Very simple language, very hard to say no unless truly you want money to corrupt our system. That was passed by the New Mexico State Legislature the first time it came in, with our fabulous partner, Common Cause New Mexico, leading the way here. And so we passed it here, but in that resolution there was a requirement that that resolution and the language be delivered to the congressional delegation from New Mexico, essentially saying, here is an amendment we're ready to ratify. Please do something, because predominantly everyone in the country, not everyone, most people in the country, most people in the state of New Mexico believe this needs to be addressed. So it's tangible, you can read it, a third grade education can understand, digest, and believe in it. We deliver that to the delegation of New Mexico saying, please help us pass, send this back for ratification. But rather than just ending that after passing it in the State House, which usually those things, everybody feels good, everybody gives a thumbs up, and then they put something in either the circular file or the drawer. This was an extension of that to go with a body of people, and we were very fortunate to have American Promise be willing to incorporate it into Lobby Day and all the people who showed up for that. But it was to show up and say, we care and we're not going away. So anything like that that you can use to replicate the pressure, the understanding that there is a consensus building, that I often tell my children the two greatest forces in the universe are inertia and momentum. And believe me, inertia is the one that seems absolutely impossible to get over sometimes in Congress. On the other hand, momentum's unbelievable. And if you get this sense that it's inevitable, everybody wants to be on that train. So our goal when we work with American Promise, literally every day and every week, as we work with Take Back Our Republic, a right of center group that is in our group, as we're trying to go into new states like Ohio and Virginia and Pennsylvania and Colorado and North Carolina, we are working to find a solution there that fits into the bigger piece, not trying to fight for exactly our way, but literally trying to help that inertia continue to be more and more momentum. So with that, I get to be quiet, and I sure look forward to engaging with you in any questions or conversation that you'd like to get involved in. Again, thank you so much to American Promise for what you guys do every day, but for inviting me to come and talk today.
Steve, thank you. We're so lucky to have this partnership with you and FixItAmerica, and I know that we have very big things on the horizon and can't wait to see what happens this year in 2019, 2020, and beyond. And so Steve is going to hang out with us for a little bit longer and take some questions. Azer, you want to help run the Q&A here for Steve?
Yeah, absolutely. So everyone, if you have a question, go ahead and press 1. Press 1 on your keypad so I know to call on you. And hopefully we'll have some fantastic questions. And Steve, while people are thinking of them, I had one that I wanted to ask. You know, a lot of people are working on our candidate pledge campaign, doing sort of that, you know, citizen watchdoggery that you were talking about. How are we holding candidates accountable? And my question is, you know, once someone signs the candidate pledge, you know, American Promise is, you know, making nice social media graphics and pushing those out. But what are some additional ways that citizens can be sort of amplifying the impact of a candidate really saying, I'm standing with people, not profits?
Yeah, I think it's truly accountability, right? If you can sign a pledge, but there's no impact when you have a vote. In other words, rubber hits the road. We now have a vote in some states, like New Mexico. You can't get on the ballot, for example, unless you get the legislature to agree it should go on the ballot. So we have had ethics commissions, things of that sort that we wanted to get on the ballot. So let's say you sign something like the pledge that you guys are working on, and get a chance to walk around and parade and say, look, I'm with these guys at American Promise. Of course, we want money out of politics, but then you're not keeping track of what happens in the state of Massachusetts or what happens in the state of Wyoming when that comes up for a vote. And there's no accountability. That essentially what you've handed those legislators is a free ticket, right? So if you don't circle back around, find a way. One of the things I helped Common Cause do in New Mexico, which has been really helpful, is to start, and again, I use the NRA because they're really good at this stuff. So they had put together a lot of information that told people how the legislature voted on good governance issues. But it was way too complicated, and nobody was going to digest it and read it. So they've changed that into something called the NMGPA. So every legislator from Common Cause now gets a GPA, because we're all used to that. So they get a not just a letter grade, but also a GPA that is cumulative. So how they voted over time. If they've been in the legislature for 16 years, they have a cumulative GPA. Then they have a GPA for this year, and you can very quickly go and see, are these, and it's crazy to think it has to be this simple, but it really does. Are these good legislators or bad legislators when it comes to our cause? And that, in addition to the pledges and things of that sort, allows us as voters and consumers to be able to have some way of measuring. So that's something that other states, I hope, will start sprouting up more and more to help us know who to vote for. You know, in this election cycle, how many of the candidates, if we're honest with ourselves, how many candidates, when you go to the ballot on November 6th, how many of the candidates are you really going to know how they have voted, what they think of, how they truly act on good governance issues? And if for us, the interested people who do this and are active, if we don't like the answer we get for ourselves, then one of the things that we can truly help do is translate that so that it's easier for other people to get the information.
That makes perfect sense. Thanks for that, Steve. And it looks like a couple people have their hand up. And if you have a question, again, just press 1 on your keypad. But I'm going to call on Chet Hunt, who had his hand up right away. So, Chet, You are unmuted. Where are you calling in from, and what is your question?
Okay, I'm calling in from Knoxville, Tennessee, and I'm brand new to American Promise. This is my first call, so I may be a little behind, and hopefully I'm not asking a question that you've had to answer many times already. My concern is when I talk to people about this amendment to the Constitution, many of them get terribly afraid that once we begin that process, it can get derailed because of big money influences from other groups, such as the Koch brothers, who want to do amendments themselves. Are there safeguards to prevent such a thing from happening? The so-called or proverbial runaway convention.
Well, first of all, sir, your town is where I grew up, Knoxville, Tennessee. I went to West High School. So if you are from Knoxville, Tennessee, we'll just have to have a sidebar, and so I can. Every time I go back, I'm shocked how much it's changed. But let me give you a simple sort of bifurcation answer, and that is, if you look at Article 5 of the Constitution, there are two ways that the authors and founders said the Constitution of the United States could be amended. In Article 5, it says you can, and the way we've done this, we've done it 27 times. That's why we talk about the 28th Amendment. So the way we've done this 27 times, including the first 10, which were labeled the Bill of Rights, always was the first way. And that's the way that American Promise, Take Back Our Republic, Common Cause, FixItAmerica, that's how we're marching forward. And that way is the language itself has to be passed by Congress, right? So a specific, like the 13th Amendment, no more slavery, right? It was almost that simple. Just slavery is illegal in the United States of America. You pass that, and then it has to, with 2/3 majority in the Senate and the House. President doesn't get to talk about it. No executive branch. That then goes out to the states, and 3/4 of the state legislatures, both houses, have to pass by a plurality, meaning just 50%. They pass and ratify the amendment. As soon as that happens, it becomes the law of the land. Okay, so that's the way we have amended the Constitution 27 times. There also is language in Article 5 of the Constitution that says, or 3/4 of the states can call a convention, and then they can get together and draft amendments there. Never done that in the history of the Republic. It is, that's almost certainly what you're hearing from people who are frightened. They're not frightened that we're going to be able to pass something like the 13th Amendment, but that would address money in politics, and when it comes to FixItAmerica, also redistricting, because that language will be understood before it heads out to the states to be ratified, and that is the way we've done this 27 times without fear of the Republic. A lot of people are scared, and I share the great concern with an Article 5 convention, because then all of those political issues come into play. So when you talk to someone, it's very important to give them a little bit of that background, and depending on what you're working on, I don't want to say you can't work on an Article 5 convention if that's what you want to do, but if you're working along with the groups I just described and us to find the specific language that will be the 28th Amendment, you can say, yeah, that's not us.
Gotcha. Thank you for that question, Chet, and answer, Steve. It looks like Ellen Green Bush has her hand up. So, Ellen, I'm going to call on you. You're unmuted. Where are you calling in from, and what's your question?
Hi, I'm Ellen. I'm from Port Clinton, Ohio. And I've been working with my state rep and state senator to try to get something going here. And actually, I'm starting to talk to them about the FixItAmerica. But, Steve, you got my curiosity when you talked about the GPA. And so I wonder, how did that take a long time to do, and who did it for you? Because it seems like it would really be something that would draw people's attention to the message we're trying to get across.
Yeah, it did not take a lot of time, and part of that's because Common Cause was already creating the data. And first of all, Ellen, thank you Ohio, we're all extremely appreciative of all the work that was done with the redistricting effort in Ohio, and we literally use that as an example as we go into other states to talk about a model for how you could have fair redistricting on ballot initiatives and the like. So we are so honored to have you on the team. It really wasn't, and if you go to, obviously Ben and the guys at American Promise can get you in touch with me, which I'd be happy to have a longer conversation if you'd like. But if you go to nmgpa.org, you'll be able to see what they put up and how it looks. And of course, everything can be improved, but I think it's pretty simple, and the thing that they were most scared of, so this is an organization, Common Cause, that's been in New Mexico for more than 40 years. And the board members, some of the board members were saying, wait a minute, what kind of retribution are we going to get if we're starting to grade these guys? And Vicki Harrison, who was head of the organization, essentially said, damn the torpedoes, we're going to do it because it needs to be done. And I can tell you, even before it came out, they had tons of legislators coming and going, well, wait a minute, what's going to be graded? And whether we like grades or not, and I have my own issues with grades generally, it's the way we've been trained. And everybody wants to do well, if they can, when they're being graded. And so it's had a profound impact, and it's only been out for about a year and a half. So I would be happy to help you look at what they've done and see how hard or easy it would be to add that to the equation.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great. I think we have time for about one more question, and which is good because about one person has their hand up. So Jeffrey Dickler, I'm going to call on you. Jeffrey, you're unmuted. Where are you calling in from, and what is your question? Jeffrey, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Okay.
All right.
I am brand new to this, okay, and admittedly somewhat confused. I just moved here to New Hampshire from Missouri. I'm living in southwest New Hampshire, and I would very much like to see what I could do to get New Hampshire engaged in this 28th Amendment process. So I'd like to be able to, if there are other people in this area who I could connect with, I'd like to know how to go about that and get some guidance on next steps to make, to get this ginned up. And I was wondering if you could point me to any people or resources that could assist me.
Jeffrey, first of all, New Hampshire, one of the great leaders in this space, and there have been people trying for a long time to find the right thing that can pass in the current climate and in this election cycle, perhaps after this election cycle. There will be a ton to do, and I'm going to answer a little bit, and then I'm going to kick this to Ben because you have completely found the right place, Jeffrey. American Promise was instrumental in the last election cycle in New Hampshire to work with some of the legislators to try to get FixItAmerica. We had it introduced in the House of Representatives, and it was narrowly defeated in a procedural effort to try and keep it from getting to a complete vote. But that means there certainly is a record of who voted for, who voted against, and we are contemplating how best to move back into New Hampshire. But I mean, truly, there from a group called Open Democracy that used to be New Hampshire Rebellion to a whole bunch of, I don't know, Ben, how many we have? We have maybe 7 or 8 groups working with us up there. But I'm going to kick that to Ben a little bit because I just think, again, you're in the right place. American Promise is finding a way, state by state, to get people together, but yet not limit them from having the ability to do what I said, since nobody knows anything, and be decentralized and allowing people to get a chance to kick another soccer ball. So I'm just going to say a fond farewell, and then Ben, I'm going to let you close that out. Again, American Promise, thank you for having me on, and everybody, truly thank you for what you do. I mean, daring to take part of your Saturday to get on the phone is something. And all of the things that you're doing that none of us would ever be able to think of or create, that's why we need you and appreciate having you as a part of this movement. And then I'll kick it to you, Ben.
All right. Well, I think Ben might have muted himself or something or other. But thank you, Steve.
I've been trying to do that for a long time. I want that button.
Ben's the only one who knows how to mute himself. And the other thing I would just add, Jeffrey, is Boy Gatherer on the call too has been just instrumental in working in New Hampshire, and you'll hear from her later on. But huge thanks to you, Steve. It's just great to have you. Really nice to meet you earlier this summer, and looking forward to continue working with you, as I'm sure everyone else is as well.
Here. Thanks, and I'll give a shout out to Vicki, who I enjoyed meeting at your conference too.
Great, and we're going to hear from Vicki in just a few minutes. But before we get to the grassroots victory, I just want to share some of the actions that have been taken recently. Last year, APA members had 17 meetings with elected officials or their staff. And this year, we've already had 105 meetings with elected officials and staff so far. Last year, APA members had 26 media pieces published, and last month alone, we had 14 media pieces published for a total of 51 so far this year. Our goal is 106 for this year, and if we keep this pace up, we'll be right there, over 4 times more than we were last year. And we want to make sure that we know about these meetings with elected officials and these media pieces published so we can include them in our total for next month. So if you've had a meeting with an elected official or their staff or had a media piece published, you can go to AmericanPromise.net, and on the Take Action drop-down menu, you'll see the Citizen Uprising reporting forms option, and just use the proper reporting form to let us know about your meeting or media piece or public event or even local resolution that we can include in these calls. And the growth that we're seeing in these numbers is just really exciting and indicative of more and more people stepping up and getting involved to get big money out of politics. And I'm now thrilled to pass it over to Vicki Barnes, who's the Minnesota State Coordinator, who's going to share about her recent success in having a meeting with U.S. Senate candidate Richard Painter, which is exactly what our action is this month, requesting meetings with candidates and urging them to sign the candidate pledge. Hey, Vicki, how are you?
Hey, Azor. Thanks. And hey, Steve, thanks for contributing. He's really an inspiration. I met with Richard Painter, and I've been kind of following him for a while. And when he came out and started running for Senate to fill out Al Franken's seat, I was very intrigued by what he had to say. So I found he was speaking at a venue that was small, but would, I know, attract a big crowd. So I dragged my husband there to listen to him, and he's very inspiring. And afterwards, I did approach him and introduce myself. There are always a lot of people that want to do that, and the reason I did that was because I knew I'd be seeing him in a few weeks at the conference. So introduced myself, and he said he was looking forward to the conference, so that was good. But then I immediately went to find his communications director, so Bill Halter. That's the person that if it was a larger venue and I couldn't get to the professor, I would have gone right for the communications director, because that's how you're going to get in there. And I introduced myself to explain what I was doing. He was very enthusiastic about it, and we exchanged contact information. And later the next week, I was invited to meet with Professor Painter and his staff at his office. And his staff was probably all late 20s, maybe early 30s, and there were probably about 6 or 7 of them there. So we discussed the amendment. I gave him a copy of HJR 48 and HJR 31, and he loved 31 and did not like the corporate personhood part of 48. And he is a corporate law professor, so that's really not a surprise. But we went back and forth a little bit discussing, the need for that. And he was very concerned about the search and seizure protections and that kind of thing. And finally I said, isn't there a different way to give corporations and artificial entities that protection other than through the Constitution? And he said, well, yes, we could pass statute. So there you go. We got an opening for that. But he did support 31, and he supported the state resolution and the local resolutions. He said that really doesn't matter if it says the corporate personhood in there. It's just kind of a general non-binding thing. We then afterwards I followed up with Bill, the communications director, and explained to him that in messaging, campaign finance reform is well and good, but it's better to say get big money out of politics because that's a little less complicated to understand, and that anytime that campaign finance reform or getting money out of politics or reversing Citizens United is mentioned, they have to mention the amendment because that's the only way we're going to be able to do that. And I'm really concerned that Minnesotans need to hear that that's the solution so that when they hear about the amendment again, it won't be the first time they've heard it. And subsequently, I've gone to several events that he's presented, Professor Pager has presented, and he does actually mention American Promise and the amendment. So he is getting the word out there. In fact, one of the contacts I have for my meeting coming up next week in Alexandria, Minnesota, heard about us from Professor Painter. So that's working well. So I look forward to working with him more in the future, no matter what the primary result is. But getting in through the communications director is easiest. The staff is going to be in control of his schedule. And when they're all ready for at least part of what you're pushing for, that gives you a good in.
Fantastic, Vicki. Thank you so much. Congratulations again on the success and the continued success, and thanks for sharing this with people, on these monthly calls, on the APA leader calls, more and more. It's spreading your influence, amplifying your impact through this connectivity, and just thank you again for being here.
Thank you.
Great. So if there's anyone who's on the call who's not yet in an APA doing this type of work and wants to learn more about starting one, feel free to send me an email, again at azorc, A-Z-O-R-C, at AmericanPromise.net. And it's now just my huge pleasure to turn it over to my colleague, our other Citizen Empowerment Coordinator, to walk us through the action sheet for this month, Waboy Gatheru. Hey, Waboy.
Hey, Azer. Thank you so much, everybody, for being on the call, and thank you, Vicki and Steve, for sharing. So for this month, our action is focused on generating support for the American Promise 28th Amendment candidate pledge through well-written, compelling letters to candidates asking them to meet with us and sign the pledge. And you can find the pledge and more info about it on our website at americanpromise.net/pledge. That's americanpromise.net/pledge. And by meeting with candidates to discuss the candidate pledge, they're more likely to respond to the political will that we as citizens create. And remember, it's up to us to encourage those in office and those running to announce their support for a 28th Amendment to overturn Citizens United. This pledge is an opportunity to begin and continue a dialogue with elected officials and candidates on the 28th Amendment, and can be a really great gateway into developing a productive relationship. So here are a few key things to remember when requesting and subsequently meeting with your candidate. First, be sure to thank them both in your letter and when you meet with them in person for something that they have done or supported that strongly resonates with you. For example, a big part of my family has served in the military. So I would probably thank a candidate if they have said this for their support of veterans. And second, be sure to ask them open-ended questions to get them really candid and honest about the role of money in our political system. Remember, we want to connect with these candidates on a human level and really build a relationship that will lead us towards making them champions for the 28th Amendment. Third, be sure to know your ask. So in this case, it's the ask to sign the American Promise Candidate Pledge. 4, be sure to follow up with your candidate's office with a phone call, email, and letter with specific asks on how to engage further on the issue of the 28th Amendment. This could also be asking them to write an op-ed with you or host a public forum about the 28th Amendment. 5th, be sure to let us know about our meetings and sign pledges through the Citizen Uprising form that you can find on our website under the Take Action tab. And remember, you can find this month's action sheet along with detailed instructions on how to write a letter to your candidate and how to conduct yourself in a meeting with your candidate in the email that we sent out on Friday. And you can also find the month's action sheet along with all of our previous action sheets for the year on our website. So go to AmericanPromise.net, click on the Take Action tab at the top of the page, and click the drop-down menu. Go to How We Win Together, and then scroll to Start an APA on the right-hand side. When you scroll to the bottom of that page, you will find all of the action sheets. And as Ezer mentioned earlier, on Lobby Day, we had a number of offices we met with where a candidate was already supportive or even a co-sponsor of the congressional legislation, and also expressed interest in having a member of Congress write an op-ed on our issue and ask for help in writing it getting placed. I'm now going to pass it over to Ed Erickson, who is the president of Erickson Communications Group and former political science professor at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, to talk about op-ed articles, what they are, how to get one published, and most importantly, how can we use this tool effectively to help us win the 28th Amendment. And again, while he's talking, be sure to be thinking of questions to ask him, and when it comes time for question and answer, you can press the number 2, and I'll call on you so you can ask Ed whatever you wish. All right, Ed, we're going to pass it over to you. How are you doing?
Thanks, well, boy. I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing great.
Well, thank you, everybody, for joining this call, and it's always inspirational to hear from everybody and hear Vicki Barnes' story and hear from Steve Lipscomb. So I'm really grateful to be on this call with you today. And I'm going to talk about op-ed articles, and I'm going to run through what, where, how, when, logistics of what an op-ed is, and then end with a challenge to everybody on this call. So to begin, if you subscribe to a newspaper and you get the daily paper on your doorstep every morning, you flip to the back page of Section A, and that's where your editorials are going to be, your op-eds, and your letters to the editor. So I want to start by just talking about the difference between those 3 elements of the newspaper, and in my opinion, one of the most important elements of the newspaper. The editorial section represents the official view of the paper. It's never signed by an author. The opinions are reached through editorial board meetings where they debate ideas and take positions on issues. It's 100% separate from the actual reporting that a paper does. The letter to the editors represent views of the public, and they tend to be very short, about 200 words. And I know a lot of American Promise members have written letters to the editors. I read a lot of them. They're fabulous. You know, oftentimes the letter to the editor responds to a column or to an editorial or something that's been recently published in the paper. The op-ed is something different entirely. Now, the op-ed literally means opposite to the editorial page, opposite to the editorial. And this is a space for, again, views of the community, but to be able to write about things that the editorial page maybe isn't writing about, or to take a position that's different from the newspaper. And it's really about having free and open space to the community to be able to share ideas. These are longer essays. They're about 700 words, and they are intended to assert a clear position on a matter of public concern. And an issue like money in politics that is an enormous concern for so many Americans is something that is extremely relevant to be writing about. And so this is a wonderful space for us to be able to utilize in order to spread the message. Typically, an op-ed is going to have a lead paragraph where you're going to clearly describe your position, to take a position on a matter, and then 5 to 8 paragraphs to be able to defend that position, to use evidence, statistics, anecdotal examples to help illustrate and convince people about your position, and then to end with a proposed solution, in this case, the 28th Amendment. So that's what an op-ed is. Where do you find them? You find op-eds in most community papers, in pretty much all regional newspapers, and certainly in statewide and national papers. In addition to papers, you'll also find op-eds all over the internet. It's a very popular format. They're fun to read. They're fun to write. And so they've really taken off online. Most papers have submission information online. If you can't find submission information for your local paper, you can always call the editor and ask how to submit an op-ed, and generally they're very helpful and encouraging. When you're thinking about doing this for yourself, I would highly recommend submitting an op-ed to a paper that you read daily, and preferably a paper that covers your community where you live, or your state where you live. Generally speaking, it's best not to start with big national papers like the LA Times or the New York Times or the Washington Post. It's always a chance that one of those papers will publish your work, but they reject and receive so many submissions every week that it's very unlikely, and you're better off starting at home. So how do you submit an op-ed? It's very simple. You can submit one by mail, but it's much easier to do it by email. In the subject line, you just write submission and then the title of the article. And then within the body of the email, it's very important to include a note that says that it's exclusive to the paper, meaning that you're not sending it anywhere else, just to this one newspaper. And then you embed the article right in the email. Because of viruses and hacking, it's important to never include attachments for newspaper editors. So they'll open your email, they'll read it, and if they like it, they will publish it. Sometimes they'll let you know that they're publishing it. Sometimes they won't let you know that they're publishing it. So that's just something to be aware of. Fourth, why? Why write op-eds? And there's 2 really important reasons to consider this type of writing. And the first is that there are a number of inherent biases to newspapers. And the first is that newspapers and reporters focus on the news, which means what's immediately present or immediately coming down the pipeline. And so when we're talking about an issue like a constitutional amendment, unless there's a bill being introduced in Congress or unless you're passing a local resolution, which could be a news moment and is great to seize, your local paper is probably not talking about something that has a longer-term horizon. It doesn't mean that it's not important. It just means that it's part of that inherent bias that is going to lessen the amount of news coverage an issue like this is going to get. That is, again, one of the reasons why papers have op-ed sections, is to be covering issues that matter to the public that is otherwise being overlooked by the reporting or the editors. And so it's a very relevant issue to be writing op-eds about. And then the second reason why they're so important is because it's such a powerful way to educate your community, to connect with your community, and inspire other people to join even a small regional paper like the Portland Press Herald in Maine reaches 77,000 people, daily subscribers, in addition to being published online and available widely to be read. So, win is my last section. This is a challenge that I want to pose to everybody on the phone. I used to teach a class at UMass Amherst called Interpretations and Methods, and this class fulfilled the junior year writing requirement for the political science department. In other words, it was mandatory. Students couldn't graduate without passing my class. So we had a number of writing assignments, and some of them were practical and some were academic. And my favorite writing assignment was the op-ed essay, where students had a week to write op-eds. And in addition to writing the op-eds, which was mandatory, I gave students extra credit just for submitting articles to local papers. And every single semester, at least 3 students would have articles published. It was an incredibly empowering experience for the students and even for the whole class to see their classmates be able to write something and influence a larger narrative and discussion. And so I don't have the authority to pass or fail anybody on this call for being citizen leaders, although I wish I did. But I will challenge you to go home, or you're probably already at home on the weekend, but spend this weekend or spend early next week writing a 700-word essay, op-ed. Some of you won't be able, not every article will be published, but there's a certain value to taking time and to articulate yourself and your position on this issue. And I can guarantee that many of you will be published and will be able to hit AZER's goal of how many media articles we need published this year. But we'll also make a huge impact in being able to bring more people on board and build further support for the 28th Amendment. So I'm here to answer any questions. I'll also make sure that AZER has some examples to send around. And I hope you take up the challenge.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ed. That was super informative. We only have a few minutes here, but if somebody has a question, please press the number 2 on your keypad, the number 2, and I will unmute you, and we'll call on you. Okay, Fred, where are you calling in from, and what's your question? Fred? You are unmuted with your question. All right. Looks like. Oh, go ahead, Fred.
My question is, what op-ed sources do you recommend on the internet?
That's a great question. So there are a number of outlets: U.S. News Today, U.S. News and World Report, Newsweek, The Hill, Truth Out, Common Dreams. That's a short list. I would be happy to send around a longer list. And the question behind the question is, it's great to have these published in regional newspapers. There are literally hundreds of online outlets that also publish op-eds. And so if you don't get it published locally, going to an online source is a great way to go. And I'll make sure that a full list gets sent around to everyone.
Great. Ishwari, you're unmuted. What's your question and where are you calling in from?
Hi, thank you. Santa Fe, New Mexico. And my question is, when you are wanting to help a candidate or encourage a candidate to, sign their name to an op-ed, how do you go about doing that? Because I could write my own and submit it, but I think there is some value expressed by American Promise in kind of facilitating this for the candidates or officials. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. And I've worked with a number of members of Congress on joint op-eds, and I will tell you that some are very easy to work with, and they go very smoothly, and others are very challenging to work with, even if they're extremely supportive of the issue. And so the first advice I would give is, if you are running into challenges, don't let it hold you back from publishing one on your own. So that's the first one. The second one, in terms of approaching a congressperson or candidate, just like Vicki said, it's best to go through their comms director or their press secretary. It's best to have a draft that's already written that you can share with them, that they can revise and edit or just add their name to. In most instances, when I've worked with members, they're simply adding their name to the article rather than going through a process of writing it with you. So that would be my 2-3 pieces of advice.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for your questions. I'm going to kick it back to Azer to close off the call. And just so everybody knows, today is Azer's birthday, so be sure to wish him happy birthday when we sign off.
Oh, man, thank you for that. Whoa, boy. I wish we had more time for questions. If folks have specific questions that you want to talk with Ed about, feel free to email me, and I'd be more than happy to connect you. And it's about 2 here on the East Coast. So if you're with your group members when we hang up, go ahead and write and send your letters to your congressional candidates asking them to meet with you as noted on the action sheet, or get cracking on Ed's, really exciting challenge of writing an op-ed and having it published. And, I'm just going to go back to something Steve said, that the 2 greatest forces in this universe are inertia and momentum. And, we continue to build momentum, but let's certainly keep this momentum going. So I'm going to unmute everyone here just to say goodbye, and we'll talk to you all next month, if not sooner for many of you guys. So thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your Saturday.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Power to the people.